Okay. Today is October the 27th, 2025. Welcome to a new year. We've already started the year. We're really on Parsha Lech Lecha, third Parsha in Breshit. But I'm going to just take a dip back into Parsha Noach for a second because the theme that I want to discuss today is the theme of covenant, Brit, and to just show from Noach to Lech Lecha um, what is happening here in terms of Brit. Brit is really one of the overarching themes of the entire Torah, perhaps even the entire Bible. Um, and just by way of introduction, in order to prepare for these things in terms of the words and numbers of words, I have an internet tool. It's really a website that it's the entire Bible on the website. It's not Sepharia. Sepharia is, of course, a very valuable resource, but this is another resource called Al HaTorah. Al HaTorah has within it a few beautiful features. Let me share one of them with you right now, which is um, this is trashim. Trashim is the graph of you select a word. For example, I'll show you here how it works. Here's a piece of text. This is happens to be chapter 6 of Breshit, Breshit Vav, Parshat Breshit, the end of Breshit. And I'm specifically looking at the word Briti. So I wanted to see how the word Brit appears in the entire Bible. So I click on that, and here within an instant, I get the entire set of, a graphing of the frequency of all the forms of Brit. These are, and this column is, I have Bivrit, Bivrit, Bavrit, Bab, et cetera, all the way down to the different things. And if I go here on the bottom are all the books of the Bible, Breshit, Shmot, Vayikra, etc. Number of times that these words occur in the different books. Okay, so you can see it's 27 times. That's pretty much. But then Divrei Hayamim, the Chronicles, that would include everything. So that's the largest number. But 27 times, that would be the number that it occurs. And then when you click on the graph, it tells you, it shows you which verses. It's a kind of electronic concordance, all of the different occurrences of the word. And so that's a very useful it's a very useful tool for me to track a word or track a concept and see how it develops through the Bible. And that's basically the starting point. I'm going like, okay, uh, from last week, from the Parsha of Noach, I was very interested in the concept of Brit, that God establishes a Brit with Noach uh, without telling us why and without telling us the content of the Brit specifically, although we'll get into that in a second, and really without telling us why Noah was deserving of this, although it does point out that Noah was exceptional, and that was the topic that I focused on last week. What are the clues that made Noah exceptional? Why did he stand out? What is it that God saw favor in him? And I pointed out in Shul that perhaps the fact, at least one clue, and I know it's a bit of a stretch, but Noah was 500 years old when he began to have children, as opposed to all the other, ancestors in that line. They all had their children in the 100s at the very latest, and they started having children earlier in the earlier decades of their lives. But Noah is way off the chart. He is 500 years old, and that suggested to me a couple of things, despite the fact that there are some interesting midrashim on it. It suggested to me that Noah made a decision and changed the course of his life, and that functions very nicely as a nice sermon, which is that one could change and choose life, even faced with the certainty that an epoch is ending and another is beginning. So we have that whole idea with Noah and a covenant and what that covenant is. And let me go into it now. And thank you all for coming on. In the minute, we're just to start over. We are talking about covenant. So here is the. Oh, this is not the text I want. Sorry. Boom. I want this one. The Lekha one. Boom. Here we. That's not it. Nope. Let me put this. Let me do this a different way. Okay. Now it's right. Boom. There we go. Okay. So God establishes a covenant with Noah. We're just going to review this. I know because we are, we didn't start the year off on Breshit, so I'll get to just dip into a little bit of Noah here. Chapter 6, verse 18. Vakimoti et briti itach uvata eletiva. That's God's promise to Noah after telling to him that I want you to make an ark. I'm going to destroy the world. Uvata ele teva ata vanecha v'ishtecha neshevanecha itach. I will establish my covenant with you, um, and you are to come into the ark, you and your sons and your wife and your sons' wives with you, without exactly telling Noah what that covenant is. What is the covenant? Um, and that becomes a kind of interpretive question, which is, well, what is God really talking about here by the covenant? And actually, the commentaries, go into different directions on this question. You have Rashi saying, for example, and you're not going to study this closely here, but Rashi says, "My covenant with you is you're going to bring all the food supplies into the ark, and I promise that I'm not going to let them rot when you have them in the ark." And that's fascinating. I'm sure he pulls that out of a midrash somewhere, and for good reason. It's because it is saying that for the duration of your sequestration on the ark, you will have the ability to sustain yourselves. You will be able to eat and drink, and I will make sure to that. And that is a covenant. I promise you that you will do that. But that's not what the text says. The text doesn't really disclose to us what it is. You could even say, the covenant is in general. I will establish my covenant with you, my covenant to make sure you survive. Now, that could be protection in all forms, including food and water. Okay, so here's the flood. The flood the flood happens. The ark settles on Mount Ararat. God commands Noah to exit the ark. Noah exits. Noah builds the altar. Noah sacrifices one of each pure animal. That's the whole story in a nutshell. Okay, and then chapter 8:21. You'll excuse the anthropomorphism here. It's a different topic, different time. Vayach Adonai et reach hanichoach, little pun on the word Noach. God smells the soothing savor. V'yomer Adonai libo, God says to his heart, Lo asif lekalel et ha'adama bavur adama, et ha'adama bavur adam. I'm not going to curse the ground again on humankind's account. Ki yetzer lev ha'adam ra minurav. Human heart forms is evil from its youth. V'lo asif ola kot kol chai. I will not strike it down everything, living things as I have done. Od kol yemei haaretz zera v'katzir v'kor v'chom v'kais v'chora v'yom v'layla lo yishpotu. Never again all the days of the earth shall sowing and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night cease. Well, that sounds a lot like a covenant. That sounds like a promise. I'm making a promise to you. It doesn't use the word brit in that line, but any of us who has ever read this gets the point. The point is, I see what's going on. God destroyed the world. God rescued one family with one unit of three sons and their wives and his own wife. God never explicitly promised them what would happen before this, except to say, I'm going to erase all humanity and everything and keep you alive. Um, and now what you have here is a promise, okay? And this seems to be the covenant. And it goes on. Is this the covenant? I'm answering. God reiterates the covenant and gives a sign. One second. As for me, "V'ani hineni mekim et briti itchem v'tzarchem acharem." I'm going to give you a sign, establish my covenant with you and your seed after you. Verse 10, verse 11, "V'akimoti et britchi etchem." I will establish my covenant with you. "V'lo yikaret kol basar od mimei mabul, v'lo yeh od mabul l'shachet ad aretz." All flesh shall never be cut off again by waters of the deluge. Never again shall there be deluge to bring the earth to ruin. Okay, I'll pause here, stop the screen, and John, go ahead. Question.
It says initially God said this to himself. A covenant has to be expressed
One
to the
second.
other party. So does the text indicate when and if the God actually addresses this to Noah?
Yeah, good question. And these are, I'm glad we're kind of getting warmed up here interpretively. I mean, you know, how to read this exactly, when God speaks to himself and that it's overheard. I mean, this is a literary you know, text literary device question. It has to do with irony, dramatic irony, the way we understand, people talking to themselves. I mean, we have tons of examples of this in the Bible where characters and God speak to themselves, and it's somehow overheard. The first one that comes to my mind also is that Asa, for example, says, "Come the days of my father's demise, and I will go kill my brother." And that he speaks to his heart. And evidently, his mother overhears that. So, the clever trick that the text is doing for us is that it is providing a dramatic irony here. And that I think is layered into the beautiful texture. How that gets conveyed, when God speaks to himself, that there is an assumption here that human beings intuit this, or at least Noah, who is, that there's how he's described. Is he's not a prophet in the sense that, let's say, uh, Moses is a prophet and all the prophets afterwards, but to a certain extent, when the tradition talks about him, they say, well, they call him somewhat like a prophet because he's able to understand that. That's what I would do to say that's close. We'll get to Alana in a second, but then I see your hand up. Go ahead.
So, Rabbi, first of all, welcome back and
Thank you.
welcome back, everyone. It's going to be a wonderful year learning. Now,
Absolutely.
here's my question. So, Rabbi, you just said it. It said in the text um, that that God gave Noah a a covenant, and you're making a big deal, God this, God that, regarding Noah. But then I ask you, Rabbi, how come Noah is not the first Jew, rather Abraham is? Like, what did he do that's different? Abraham.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. You know, we're just getting started here, and it seems that God is also figuring it out. Now that may contradict or go against the idea that God has it all worked out beforehand. Okay, and we could provide all sorts of different kinds of answers to this. Um, Basically, it's we have humanity and we have to start humanity somewhere, right? And that part of what the Torah is doing for us is laying out the background, um, and there is the understanding, of course, as the descendants of Abraham, the Jewish people, we who can trace our lineage all the way back to Abraham, uh, that we're not the only people here. That there's a whole family of humanity, and that Noah is essentially the father of what will become humanity through his three sons. Now this is, of course, the Bible's projection of the idea of the interrelatedness of all humanity as one family. And what this does is it basically creates what the Bible is doing is it says, here's the big picture, creation, and here's a picture within the big picture, which is humanity, all the different families of humanity, as it is known to the, here, which is the families of Shem, the families of Ham, the families of Japhet, which populate Mesopotamia, Africa, and Europe. Okay. And then within the families of Shem is a lineage. And within that lineage, you go all the way down from Shem to Abraham, 10 generations. It's Adam to Noah is 10 generations, and Noah to Abraham is 10 generations. And so what we then have is a very interesting plot, or the story, which is how God wants to make a covenant with the world, and God wants to bring God's name, God's place, God's idea into the world, and understands that the instrumentality for it is to have this unique relationship with one family. The one family will not make everybody part of that family because everybody is the human family, but will have one role to do, and that basically is the reason why we don't start out with Noah. Go ahead, Ilana.
So I'm thinking of a few things here. First of all, the covenant, does it have a date, or is it forever? Is it from one time to another time, or is it a promise forever? That's one thing. The other thing, why is God deciding not to do it again after he just did it? And the third thing, does it is the covenant on until now, or did it have some
Yeah.
stops and some discontinued times?
These are great questions. And so let's start with the first question, which is when the story is told and God is saying in the story, I'm never going to destroy the world again, basically, in the poetic way that we saw. Basically, God is saying forever. That is forever, forever. Okay? And we'll hold that for a second. Your second question, which was, you know, why does God do it again?
Why is he decided not to do it again
Why did he
after
decide not to do it again?
he just did it?
Yes. So, and this is it's a great question. The rabbis actually deal with it in their own way, and they say as follows: that God was actually creating and destroying worlds prior to the creation of this world. And when you kind of, I've been saying to people, what you need to do when you read these chapters, you need to sit with a bottle of Chardonnay. You need to read a chapter, sip a glass, read a chapter, sip another glass, and then kind of get into go into the world, okay? And what you have there is a very stunning idea, which is that the world is in a constant state of creation and destruction, which ends with the creation of Adam and then the flood, which is a kind of undoing of creation, and then the recreation of humanity from Noah. And when God says, "I'm just not going to do it anymore," we can interpret that in so many different ways, including, I found the thing that is closest to what I want. Or alternatively, you could say, I'm tired of destroying this. Now, what's so fascinating in this approach is, since we are a very scientific generation, and we are loaded with knowledge about the world and geology and the origin of the cosmos, etc. We have lots and lots of information about that. And the world and the universe being billions of years old, one could argue that there are cycles of creation and destruction also going on with the world. I'm not saying that we need to, make this connection, but it's always very interesting to try this, which is, you know, if you study geology, for example, and we have Bob Metz from time to time, and I talk to him about this, and there are cycles in rock. Of course, there are billions of years that the rock cycles through all sorts of forms over the course of billions of years. But the point is that it's not static, and so there is the sense though with humanity, God wants to hold on to something. Now, the last question was, is it ever going to happen again? And the answer is, we just know too much about the solar system. We know too much about stars.
I meant
You know,
in this form, not as a flood, because we see through history that we had many different floods in different forms.
yes. So that's are you speaking in terms of both natural phenomena and things like
Wars,
wars and
wars, and
Holocaust, etc.
yeah.
And I think those the events of great proportion like wars, the Holocaust, these are the things that pose almost the impossible theological questions here. In fact, Irving Yitz Greenberg, who just wrote a great book about it's called the the triumph of life. Uh, he has been teaching throughout his career about the idea that the covenant was broken, and he says that part of what it means to be a modern Jew, especially after the Holocaust, is to reckon with these promises that have emerged from the Bible as covenants, which through no part of the Jewish people were broken. That the promise that God would take care, that God would protect, the people even in their exile, was broken, and that how do you live and create a Judaism within the fractured covenant? And there are many Jewish philosophers who have reckoned with that question, and I think it it is a question that underlies a lot of our reading, which is that here we are in a world that has been broken. I mean, already at the time of Noah, it's all erased. Everything is erased, and humanity is destroyed, and it's recreated. And uh, what does that mean now in terms of the relationship that God has with the people? And when God says, "I'm going to make a covenant," how much should we trust God? Is and the here the snapshot that the Torah is giving us is that God indeed is trustworthy, and that we should place our trust, notwithstanding the fact that we really don't know how the story is going to end at this point. If we're in the story right now, we don't know. Go ahead, John.
I have a proposed answer to Lana's second question. Excuse me. I think God decided so quickly that he wouldn't do it again because he regretted what he did.
Yeah.
He came to realize the decision to destroy the world was arbitrary because at that time there were no Noahide laws. There were no norms that I know of, according to which Noah is deemed righteous and the rest of the world was evil. If there were norms, they weren't clearly established. And justice involves and due process involves before one is punished that one become clearly aware that certain things should be done and shouldn't be done. That was the purpose, I think, of the Noahide laws. They didn't exist before the flood. And I think God regrets that he took this terrible action on when there was really very little basis and guidance to humanity as to how to act.
Well, I think that that's a very compelling way to see it. Before the flood, God is filled with regret, having made human beings, and that human beings have turned out the way they were. In the reading that I was drawn to this year, just rereading these stories, it seemed to me that God really wanted to end it all, and that the fact that there was an exceptional person like Noah made God think twice about this. And then once the flood happens, and once Noah's out of the ark and there's the sacrifice, etc., that's when we have this remarkable moment where God makes the promise, and God we can read those lines with the pathos that I think you are rightly seeing in them, or hearing in them. Susie, unmute yourself and you'll be able
Yeah.
to.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So um, Menachem Leibtag yesterday was talking about how the similar wording is used both before and after the flood in terms of the the depravity of humans. And the, he said, but there's now humans can learn from their mistakes, and there can be tshuva. The other thing is that as many times as we've been destroyed, we're still here. The Philistines aren't, but we're still here.
Yes, that's focused on the Jewish people, and the last 2 years have taught us that our existence is not something to be taken for granted. We are constantly, in some ways, uh, worried about our future, and understand that our existence is not. We certainly believe that we will be around, and that keeps us in some ways triumphant. But it's not at zero cost. It comes at a tremendous cost. All right, let's move on into the next phases of this. So we have God saying, this is still with Noah. The sign of the covenant is the rainbow, of course. Um, this is the sign of the covenant which I set before me and you and all living beings. My bow I set in the clouds, that it may serve as a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. When I becloud the earth with clouds, and in the clouds as the bow is seen, I will call to my mind the covenant, my covenant, that is between me and you and all living beings, all flesh. It shall be, never again shall the waters become a deluge to bring to ruin. So that's the content of the covenant is, I'm not going to destroy the world with water. When the bow is in the clouds, I will look at it to call to mind the age-old covenant between God and living beings, all flesh that is upon the earth. God said to Noah, this is the sign of the covenant that I have established between me and all flesh that is upon the earth. And just, we can, you know, just pause here and say, well, isn't that interesting? That's the rainbow. And every time you see the rainbow, you say a bracha, and there's, Zocher, Abrid, Aman, Bibito, etc. God, we pray, we say, may you be, remember the covenant. Um, and I mean, that's the rabbinic overlay to the story, which is to see that there's a possibility of divine protection, and that will be sustained throughout the course of the rest of history through eternity. As I said, one can become very nihilistic just if you study a little bit of physics and astronomy, and say, well, in the course of, I don't know how many billion years it will be, the sun will run out of its fuel, and it will stop, it will become a great big star, and then a shrinking star. And when it becomes a great big star, the Earth's ozone layer and all the protective elements that we have to shield us from the sun's radiation will not be sufficient, and life as we know it, certainly human life won't survive that. That 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 makes for profound depression. Except when we think about it, we say none of us are going to be around in that length of time, let alone in the next. I venture to guess that even in a century, of course, our little group here won't be around. But that's not the point. The point is that we think in terms of the lifespan, our lifespan, and the children's lifespan, and children's children. Our imaginations probably don't go beyond 4 or 5 generations. 4 generations is a lifetime in terms of how far back we can go if we are lucky enough to be able to go back, if we live in any normal circumstances. And sometimes 4 generations is how far we can go in the future, right? Most of us have a certain awareness of our great grandparents, and most of us may, if live long enough, may have a certain awareness of great grandchildren. We all live within a span of 3 to 6, maybe to 8 generations, uh, and that's living memory, and that's beyond that we just don't know. I think what just as a kind of footnote here, there is this phenomenon now of this climate depression, where especially young people who are so connected to issues relating to the environment and global warming, etc., are feeling just so you know depressed, literally, about the future. And there's a term for this which I'm forgetting, but they they're having difficulty kind of bringing themselves to structuring a whole life that has a future, because they don't see the point to it. And religion has a lot to say to this. And at the very least, it's to say to people, don't lose hope. We don't lose hope in humanity and our ability to even accommodate and solve these problems. Okay, that's the Noah story, just off the as a kind of background to the covenant that happens here. Okay, so Abraham, we have Abraham makes a covenant with his neighbor. That's just a little footnote. It's another Abraham as allies. But when we meet Abraham in this parsha, uh, we have God in chapter 12 saying to Abraham as follows. These are the words that open the parsha. Lekh lecha me'artzecha me'moladecha me'beit avicha la'aretz asher areka. I think, some of the most important words in the Jewish tradition. Go you forth from your land, from your kindred, from your father's house to the land that I will let you see. Ve'escha legoy gadol va'avarechecha va'agadla shemecha. I will make a great nation of you, and will give you blessing, and will make your name great. Ve'ya bracha, and you will be a blessing. So the translation is a little rigid here, but basically we have a promise that God is making here. God's making the promise to Abraham, saying, "I'll make you great. I'm going to bless you. I'm going to make your name great, and you will be a blessing." Um, and we don't need to be too expansive in our imagination to really interpret this. I'm taking you, I'm gonna make you into a great nation. I guess what we mean by that very simply is you're gonna be the father of a nation. I'm gonna bless you, which is I'm going to convey to you a certain kind of aura and a certain kind of I'm going to go into metaphor. I'm going to shine a light on you. I'm going to, share some of myself, share some of this life-giving power to you. I will make your name great. In other words, you'll get a reputation, and you'll be a blessing. That is to say, when you are encountered in the world, you will have blessing go with you through the world. And this sounds very far-fetched and removed, but our understanding, it keys into the experience that we have when we are near really extraordinary people. We don't want to get magical about it, but we do feel a sense of coming alive. That when we encounter an extraordinary person, gifted or talented or exceptionally wise or exceptionally pious or exceptionally righteous, or a person of integrity or a person who models a certain kind of way of living that is good, we feel quite different from that, and that feeling is what we call blessing. Okay, so that's the promise. I will bless those blessing you, while those insulting you I will curse. All the clans of the earth will find blessing through you. Again, very stiff translation. Bless those who bless you, curse those who curse you, meaning that when people admire you and people kind of, respond to you with a sense of blessing, they themselves will be blessed. But if people despise you and say and do terrible things to you, that terrible things will happen to them. I've used this line now in the present context with anti-Semitism, and I think that this is one of the eternal truths of Jewish peoplehood, which is that people who admire the Jews, people who admire the values that we have, themselves possess the relationship with those values that make them themselves blessed. And people who envy or who are afraid or who demonize Jews and Jewish values, they themselves, I think, are just suffused with a kind of ugliness and accursedness. So to me, this verse is a truism that the Bible expresses here. But there's no mention of the word covenant here, uh, because at this point, this is not yet how it's being framed. What we have here is a promise. You'll be more than yourself. You'll be a blessing into the world, and there'll be a relationship with the world, of the world to you. Okay? So I'm saying, is this a covenant? Well, yeah, kind of. Without saying the word covenant, it is a covenant. But here is the covenant, or at least one of several covenants that God makes with Abraham. This is in chapter 15 in our Parsha, where we have this extraordinary scene where God puts Abraham to sleep, or there's a vision, and Abraham makes the covenant of the pieces, that he takes numerous animals, slaughters them, cuts them in half, which seems to be an echo of an ancient covenantal practice. He walks through these pieces of the animals. The animals are the pieces are consumed, and God says, "Bayomahu karat Adonai et Avram brit lemor." On that day, God made a covenant with Abraham, saying, "L'zarachan natati et haaretz hazot." Give this land to your seed. Minahar Mitzrayim ad Nahar Gadol Nahar Prat, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates. The Kenite, the Kenizzite, the Cadmonite, the Hittite, the Perizzite, the Rephite, the Amorite, the Canaanite, the Girgashite, and the Jebusite. Those are the people that live on the land, and the land itself, it's going to be given to you. Now, the assumption here operating is that God, as creator of the land, the whole earth, apportions the land to whomever God wants to apportion the land. And while we can take issue with the actual geography here, the river of Egypt to the great river, which means that in the maximalist version of the divine covenant on the land, it goes all the way from the Nile to the Euphrates. Let's just put that aside in terms of modern geopolitics. But that's the covenant. That is to say, and I think that the essence of this covenant is you're going to dwell in a land. In order for you to be this people, and in order for my name, God, to kind of pulsate through the world, I need a capital, I need a place, I need a land for this people. and for them to live according to the way I like. We have Alana, then Susie. Go ahead.
Not trying to get into politics.
Of course.
When it says Lezaracha, is it Yitzhak and Ishmael?
Good question. It's going to be clarified in a later passage, and that's coming up right now, because what happens very clearly is, and we'll see this, that God says the covenant is going to go to Isaac. So right now, this is before an Isaac and before an Ishmael, but and that of course makes for a very, very interesting family dynamic. And this is, I think, part of the joy in reading these stories, is that here's a character who God promises everything to, and has not delivered for, and the character Abraham and Sarah, his wife, are saying, like, all of this is supposed to happen. Maybe we are to move things along here. And that's why Ishmael is born. Ishmael is born because they've been promised to have a family. They can't have a family, and they take matters in their own hands through surrogacy. Basically, Hagar functions as a surrogate to Sarah. But having established that complicated detail now, God has to clearly say, no, the covenant is not going to go through Ishmael. The covenant is going to go through Isaac, and we'll see that passage explained in a moment. Go ahead, Susie.
Yeah. So two things. One to Ilana. So it's Lazar Acha, that's singular. Lazar Echa would be plural. So that would, Lazar Echa could be inclusive of Ishmael, but it says Zar Acha.
Well, so, up until now, we don't have anybody.
Right. We don't have anything. And of course, Zerah can also be, it doesn't necessarily imply only singular, but, we could make a midrash on that. What was the other thing I wanted to say? Not from Nahar, one of my Zoom teachers had pointed out that Nahar Mitzrayim ad Nahar Gadol is not necessarily ad bichlal. It's not necessarily inclusive. It just means, like, between those two rivers is going to be the, where you're going to.
Well, that's nice, and I think that's a very compelling interpretation, because the Bible often will use that kind of language, which is very, very expansive language to indicate, upper limits, not necessarily, beyond them. I think what's important here on at least one thing that's important here is that it's not, I'm not giving you the world. And here, already in the Bible, the Hebrew mind is not an imperialist mind, which is, I'm not going to conquer the world. I'm going to give you just a very partitioned place from which you can establish your nation. And it's because and it's from a very defined piece of land, that you will create your nation, and that way become the influence in the world. So already this notion of a very limited area is it's already imprinted in the Bible from the beginning. The whole idea of imperialism, we will meet that in the later books of the Bible, specifically during the Davidic and Solomonic era, when there is an effort to establish what becomes an empire. The broadest reach of the Davidic reign will go, already, a little bit into areas beyond, but you can read in the books, Second Samuel and Kings, you understand that the further that the kingdom expands, the more problems it's going to have, and that's usually the case with empires. Empires, as when they expand, they encounter all sorts of problems. They have to sustain themselves, and that, of course, happened to every empire in history. up, even the British Empire being the recent example. The British Empire kind of collapses after the Second World War, basically. Although there are vestiges of that
Uh,
elsewhere.
uh,
Yeah.
but
But
but why can't other nations claim the land of Canaan if they came from the descendants of Abraham?
if
I
they
mean,
came,
that's what you're having today, isn't it? Uh,
so we have, the conflict today has all sorts of mythological uh, and historical, roots to it. One of them being, you know, the one you mentioned, which is, couldn't someone claim that they are descendants also of Abraham and therefore inherit the land? And so the answer to that is, well, the covenant, if we're following the Bible, the covenant goes through Isaac. It doesn't go through Ishmael. And so the covenant, um, and specifically the land element of the covenant is through the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and not Abraham, Ishmael, and the ensuing nations that come out of Ishmael. Okay. Um, all right, so we'll go on. I just, I'm going to pause here with a little bit of lexicography, and that the word "breed." It's an unusual word altogether. Um, so here are some basic meanings of it. Covenant, alliance, pledge. You can have a covenant between men, treaty, alliance, league, constitution, ordinance, agreement, pledge, alliance, or between God and man, alliance, a friendship, covenant, etc. And so here, this is one attempt to give an etymology, and um, that it has circle, ring, chain, oath, that in the notion of breed, there's something about a circle, and you could you could see that it's really stretching here for something. And this comes from uh, the Klein dictionary, or Jastrow, I'm sorry. Um, and here, this is the Ezra Klein dictionary, says of uncertain etymology. He cites other lexicographers. Meir derives it from bara, to eat bread. It would have been so called because in ancient times it was customary for those concluding a treaty or alliance to partake of a meal, which is probably true, which is that, you eat something to consummate a covenant, or you do something ritually, or you sacrifice, or you construct something, you erect a monument, etc. All of these things are ways of demonstrating a covenant. But he's, Klein is probably true. We just don't know. We just don't know, and we have to kind of take that, and understand, like many words, we just don't know what the origin is. Although I'd love to know what the origin of Brit is. And so, for example, I'm just going to go back to my little graph here, which is that, I'll just stop here and show you the frequency of the word in the Bible. Just again, back to this here. So you have um, the the this is the number, the times that it occurs here. In this column here, it says the word 284 times in different forms throughout the Bible. Uh, Again, notice that it's heavily in Genesis and in Devarim. Um, and in the dictionary, it cites 199 times. Evidently, there are more. Um, but I'm going to just stop that and go back to my text here. Um, so you have the covenant, again, different examples of the covenants that exist in the Bible. Abraham and the Amorites, these are political covenants. Um, the nations against Israel, I just quoted this one. Ki noatzu lev yachdav alecha brit yichrotu. Unanimous in their council, they have made an alliance against you. I see the hands. We'll get to that in a second. Nations with Egypt, Ephraim and Assyria, Judah, Israel, Judah and Tyre, etc., etc. A constitution, This is David and the elders of Israel, etc. An agreement, all of these different kinds of covenants. David, the alliance of friendship between David and Jonathan is phrased in terms of a covenant. Jonathan and David made a pact because Jonathan loved him as himself. And we can go in many directions there. What did they do to solidify their pact? Did they cut their wrist and, did they bleed on each other? No, who knows, Um, but covenants, can be written, can be unwritten, etc. We'll talk about that in a second. Marriage, then we have God and man, divine constitution, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, which we're talking about, Israel and Sinai, which of course the major covenant of the whole Torah. Uh, we have Brit Shalom, the covenant of peace with Pinchas, Joshua and Israel, David, Yoyada, etc., etc., etc. All these different, and of course, all sorts of different phrases involving covenant and covenant violation, which we got. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing, and we got Susie and we got Bob.
Yeah. So I just looked at my Evan Shoshan for Brit, and it said Ulai min bara bachar. So maybe it's from choose, but it's not clear. I mean, they
Yeah,
usually
look, I mean, it's a lovely drash to make Brit, from Bachar, right? Yeah, because, who do you make a covenant with? You make a covenant with people that you choose. But um, I don't know where to go with that. So
yeah. I mean, Evan Shoshan is usually much more specific in its etymologies. So
sure,
it
good,
says Ulai. It means it's as you said, we don't know.
good. Well, this is an AI question. Bob, go ahead. Or this is a mystical question. Who knows?
No, it's not going to be either of those for me today. I find the discussion very interesting because I've always thought of covenant as more an exchange of gifts rather
Okay.
than the idea of alliances and treaties. And certainly there's legal aspects to it. And when I used to teach our medical students, I would say the doctor-patient relationship is not a contract, but it's really a covenant between you in terms of gift exchange. And so my related question to that is not the number of times that Brit appears, but what is the context and where it appears? And so if there are multiple parties to a covenant, who initiates it? Is it always Hashem first? Is
Yeah.
it humanity that does things? Does it change? Is it evanescent? Does it keep going? So
Well,
what is the context?
if starting from Genesis 1:1, this is God, and this God is initiating the covenant. There's no human partner that says, "Oh, I'd like to have a relationship. I'd like to have something in writing. I'd like to have an agreement." It's God that reaches out. Although one could argue, and I would entertain this kind of debate, which is, there are characters that do call on God, even Hevel, Cain and Hevel, they're not making covenants with God, but they are saying, we want to thank you, and they're expressing that through their offerings. And then we have Hanoch, who walks with God. It's not a covenant, but he has a relationship. So
Yep.
we get the sense that when finally it comes to Noah, that God wants to make an agreement. And here again, I'm going to give a very narrow reading to this, which is that God is, I don't want to say contrary to what John said earlier, which is God is so, God regrets having destroyed the world, that God, prior to regretting destroying the world, he's fed up with the world and he destroys the world. And in wanting to destroy the world, he faces a problem because out of nowhere, and this is my reading, out of nowhere we have an exceptional human being that it's almost like an accident. Noah, and not because Noah, I argue, is a good guy or a nice guy, but Noah is a person of integrity and honesty and truth and has a relationship with God, that is something that calls God's attention. And so it's like saying, I want to, take my cue from the biblical commentators who use lots of metaphors. God is like the one who builds, this beautiful model and is so disappointed and wants to smash it all down, but sees one thing in the model that's really worth preserving and says, you know what? I'll take everything down and I'll start again with this. Or I'll just preserve this. I'm not going to destroy everything and walk away. I'm going to hold on to this. And so what we have in those sentences in the last verses of Genesis is the creation of a real moral tension within God, so to speak. I want to do this, but I can't do this. I want to do this because everything is evil. Well, no, not everything is evil. There's one person who's good. Correct. I never stipulated what good is. This was a human discovery. That's amazing. For that alone, I'm going to keep that individual alive and start over again. Okay.
May I say something else just briefly on that? I
Yeah.
will get a little quasi-mystical, which is
Okay, go ahead. We'll do the same.
perhaps the covenant is a way of having the conversations that you spoke about during the high holidays.
Sure.
And what it is a developmental process. I heard a very interesting discussion about Lekha in terms of it going into oneself and
Yeah.
going forward. And so if it started with Hashem doing it, now he's developing a partnership. And the covenant is
Perfect.
based on this evolving dialogue, which continues. And one of the
Nice.
things they said was that in Lekh Lecha, leaving your land, it's sort of leaving your past.
Yes.
In the other case, with the Akedah and the sacrifice, do we have a future? So in order
Nice.
to live in the present and get better, so I think the covenant is playing a role to facilitate dialogue and conversation and exchange of
Nice.
gifts.
Nice. Very nice. Okay, we got Alana, then Ruth. Go ahead.
Okay, Ruth.
Okay, I thought he said Alana, then Ruth.
All right,
Okay.
go ahead.
I mean, currently the concept of breed doesn't have to have anything to do with God or mysticism or anything. We have United States is our Sota Brit,
Our Sota Breed, the covenant, the constitution, the
and
relation.
the Soviet Union, may it rest in
Brit
peace, is
Hamoatzot.
Brit Hamoatzot. So
Okay.
those
Yeah,
are
there.
Brits.
So
Yeah.
I'm going to spend the last minute on that. Go ahead, Alana, go ahead.
What about Brit Milah?
Yeah, Brit Milah is
But that
coming.
involves God. That's
Well,
God.
okay. So if you will allow me just to I'm going to zoom to have the whole thing teed up here. So the God's covenant they were with the Father of many nations. So it's not only the land, but it's at 99. God said, "Be wholehearted with me. Here I set my covenant between me and you." What's the content? I will make you many. I'm going to make you a large number of people. Okay. Abraham can't stand it. We have a pause. Okay. And then God tells him that he's going to be the covenant is going to be in the sign of circumcision. Okay, there's a name change involved in the covenant and a promise of fecundity and royalty. I will establish my covenant between you. It'll be eternal. I will be your God, and then you'll have the land. But here's the deal: you're to keep my covenant, and this is my covenant. This is what you're talking about. Zot briti. This is my covenant you are to keep. Every male is to be circumcised. This is the sign of the covenant, so that you will have the covenant in your flesh. And if you don't do this, you violate my covenant. And the blessing to Abraham, to Sarah, Abraham laughs and says, "Let's forget it. I'm not going to have a child at the age of 100, and she's 90." And he pleads with God and says, let me have Ishmael. God said, nevertheless, Sarah, your wife, is to bear you a son. You shall call him Yitzchak. I will, this is what we were talking about before. Vakimoti et biti ito, levrit olam, lezaro achara. I will establish my covenant with him. And here you could read, I will establish a separate covenant. No, I'm going to sustain my covenant with him as the covenant for age. As for Yishmael, he'll get his own blessing, okay? But the covenant is going to go through Isaac. And that's where the big distinction begins. My covenant I will establish with Isaac, Briti, Akim et Yitzchak. So it's explicit here that the covenant is going to go through Isaac. So end of the story, Abraham circumcises himself, and Ishmael and all the male members of his entourage, okay, and they're all circumcised on the very day that God said that to him, and that's it. So now, what I want to conclude with is Okay,
I,
so
I didn't finish.
go ahead.
I was uh, I just wanted to say that okay, so with Abraham, it's two-sided brit, a conditional brit, right? Right.
Is it conditional? So you can
Yeah, if et britit tishmo, if you will follow my, only if you follow.
only if you follow. This becomes a big topic in in the later sources, in the whole discussion, all the way from there through the rabbis to today. Is the covenant conditional or unconditional? And we're always vacillating between that. You'll see um, you know teachings on this throughout the Talmud on how if it's conditional or unconditional. Um, and the reason for that is because if it's conditional, then we have to deal with the fact that we live such pious lives and God has not restored us. If it's unconditional, we can deal with the fact that we are in exile and we're waiting still for it. Uh, and of course, these questions are very profound in a modern era when we are attempting to restore the covenant in our own way with our and you know following Abraham by taking matters into our own hands, quite literally. Okay, I just want to
Okay, okay.
yeah,
Also, in today we have for a girl brita.
Brita. So
Brita.
so
So,
that
so in the gematria, brita with an aleph at the end, it's 613.
nice, very
So
nice. Okay, well, so feminism has to try and figure out a way to include the female in this very male demonstration of the covenant. And in throughout the last few decades there have been a number of ritual attempts, some of which are more compelling than others, let's just say. Uh, you know, what seems to be catching on in Israel, they call it a britah, which is a set of ceremonies, readings, etc., or just maybe the naming. That seems to be having caught on. What hasn't caught on are more elaborate rituals. There are in the 70s and 80s there were books published on this with take the baby's foot and dip it in water. I mean, there are all sorts of inventions in terms of ritual, which all were trying to answer, how are we going to ritually demonstrate something? You're not going to get anywhere near circumcision in terms of its physical power. I mean, it just, if we were to do that to female in any way, that would be seen in a much negative light. Um, and Judaism, as it evolves, is trying to incorporate other rituals of covenanting. I just want to conclude with you know, the covenant is such a fundamental idea. We take it for granted in terms of all of the different kinds of levels of covenant that exist, both written and unwritten. So I was just doing a little thought experiment in terms of, all the from the moment you get up in the morning, and all the things that you encounter and really take for granted, but are really based on certain kinds of covenants, again, covenants that are written and unwritten. So for example, I'll just, try you trust that you're going to turn your water on and it's going to work, okay? And you trust that you're going to turn a light on and it's going to work, and you trust that you turn your stove on, it's going to work. And all of this has to do with the fact that you know built into our lives are a sense of utilities, and that there's a system, a whole infrastructure in our life that we trust. You know, uh, Engineers and the people who are responsible for them, they're working very, very hard to keep that. I mentioned a few weeks ago in shul, the person a water engineer in the north in Israel, in the Sapir facility, says, "I'm a believer. I'm a believer because every time I turn a faucet on in Israel, it's a miracle that water comes out. And he was saying it as a joke, but he meant it very seriously because he says, I know what went into the infrastructure to get water from the Kinneret to my tap, and it's nothing short of a miracle. And you know what? He's right, but we all trust all the elements of that. Okay. Another one, we trust in engineers. We go on you want to make sure that the road is not going to collapse. We can see, how these things work. Our houses collapse after a certain time because they're not engineered properly, etc. Authority, we want to make sure that everything's intact, the federal, state, and local. Part of the crisis that people, I think, experience in their own sense of who they are is, can we trust people in authority? I mean, without going into it in great depth, that's really one of the great debates that is happening now on a very deep level within our society. Who do we trust? Relationships, spouses, parents, and children, friends, community. All these people, we don't have written covenants with our children or our parents. We have a ketubah, we have other kinds of covenants, but the covenants are based on, these relationships are based on trust. Companies, we trust that the amount of money that we had last night is going to be the amount of money that we have this morning. We are all susceptible to fraud and to identity theft and all the different areas where you place a trust. They are called trust companies, not by coincidence. Okay. Trust and safety and security. We trust that when we call 911, they're going to answer. When we don't get a response as quickly as we expected, we feel that it's a broken trust. Okay. And then, of course, at the end, I have trust in God question mark, which is, placed in the context of the world, the running of the world, the cosmos, the seasons, etc., the Noahide covenant, which is the sun, the wind, the sky, the earth, etc. We are trusting that everything is going to function as possible. Now, is that a written covenant? Do I have a document that says that? Well, I have the Torah that says that. I have, but all of that is and each one of those on everyone relies on trust, a formal trust, which can be encoded in a document that you sign. When you all these end user licensing agreements for the EULAs for cell phones and any piece of software that you download. You have a licensing agreement. Part of that is I trust the company to not use my data or to use my data only in a certain way, etc. And when that's breached, it's a breach of trust. And so at every single point of access in our lives, we have a covenant, which tells me one thing then about this idea within the Torah, and that it is to say that the Torah is onto something. The Torah understands here or is expressing something that's very basic to all civilization. All civilization has to rely on some level of trust, otherwise you don't have a civilization. And you could take this and expand it in every direction possible. All right. Final thoughts, anyone? Good.
Well, just on Brit, I don't remember where I read this. So you can ask, why rainbow?
Yeah, why a rainbow?
So, 7 is the number of completion and of nature and creation. 8 is the number of Brit, of covenant. The gematria of Keshet is 800.
Okay.
So that's why Keshet is Brit, is the.
Very nice. I'm gonna study that over a glass of wine.
I know.
And I read someplace that the bow is pointed in a direction where
Right.
at least Hashem is not shooting it at us
There you go. Very
in the
good.
rainbow.
Very nice. It's a covenant of peace. All right, everyone. Have a good week. We'll see you all. Tuesday class is meeting tomorrow. There were the sisterhood. We're doing it in person, but we'll also put it online as well. All right. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.